Well, it's an honor to be here with all of you today. My name is Travis. I'm one of the pastors on staff here at Evangel. Every year in July, my extended family, we gather together on the shores of Lake Superior near the Canadian border in a little town in northern Minnesota called Grand Marais. Last year, 1 year ago, just this last weekend, we were planning on going again like normal, but I waited a little bit too long to call up to reserve a cabin. In fact, I called about 2 weeks out and everything, or 2 months out, and everything was booked. I called about 10 places, and every single time I kept hearing the same phrase, "We're full." I thought for sure that we were going to have to sleep at a roadside rest or something until I suddenly came across what seemed like the last cabin left in town. After a quick glance of the picture of this cabin online, I told the guy, I said, "I'll take it." I was desperate. But then when I got off the phone, I kind of thought to myself, I realized that I probably needed to take a little bit closer look at the pictures since, after all, 5 of us were going to cram into this little cabin for 7 days. So I fired my computer back up, I leaned in, I looked at the pictures of this little cabin online, and guys, at that moment, I almost had a heart attack. This place was a shack. It was awful. And I'm sorry, I don't normally talk like that, but this place was so old and so worn out. I looked in horror at these pictures, at this cabin, this shack of a place, as I over and over again reminded myself that I had agreed to pay $200 a night. I was so bummed. It was awful. It even had a queen mattress right in the middle of the kitchen next to the kitchen table. No joke. I could wake up every single morning with people frying eggs and bacon next to my head. I was so disappointed, so bummed out. This had never happened to me before. I called 2 months out, but normally I call like 6 months. I kept kicking myself thinking I should have called 6, 7 months earlier, like all the rest of my extended family do at Christmas, to line up a cabin. And that's when it happened. Out of nowhere, a thought popped in my mind. You see, I suddenly remembered that I had a friend who rented cabins up in that area, and yet I hadn't talked to him in several years. So I kind of thought, well, this is a long shot. I don't know if he still owns them, still rents them, or has any openings, but I pulled out my phone. I got a text ready to go, and I hit send. It was late at night, so I turned the light off, and I went to bed. The next morning, my cell phone alarm went off, and I woke up, and I looked at my phone, and I suddenly realized that there was already a text back to me from my friend who had owned cabins and rented them. I hit the text, and he went on to say that not only did he still have a cabin, but that it was available. He said that we could stay there, but on one condition. We couldn't pay for it. We had to stay there for free. And I gulped. I was so bummed out because I grew up with a strong work ethic. I don't like to do freebies. I like to pay my own way in life. And I thought, man, that's too bad. I wish I could stay there. But then out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the pictures that he sent of this cabin. Guys, my jaw hit the floor. This wasn't a cabin. It was a 4,000 square foot lake home, literally right on Lake Superior. I looked at the pictures and they blew my mind. I quickly went to my family and I showed them the pictures and I said, "Isn't it a bummer that we can't go there?" And immediately they're like, "Dad, you're crazy. What are you thinking? We just won the cabin lottery. Please tell him yes." So I was like, wow, you know what? This guy is so cool. And so I texted him. I made the decision, okay, we're going to go. And I thanked him for his kindness, but also told him we were humbled by his generosity. And guys, I'll never forget the day. We got the keys. The day came. We drove in the private driveway all the way down to the lake. It had lights all the way along. We got up to the lake home door. We opened it up, and immediately we were drowning in enormity. Massive house, really, really tall, huge ceilings, floor to ceiling glass, 1,000 great views of Lake Superior. I looked at everything in this lake home. It was amazing, gorgeous. I looked down at the kitchen table and I thought, man, that's worth more than my car. It was so awesome. Guys, we had a great time. It was fabulous, but more importantly, we made some of the best memories of our lives as a family together. So fun. But I tell you that story, and here's why. Because it boggles my mind. It boggles my mind. I think to myself, how could someone go from having to stay in an old rundown shack of a cabin that's ready to fall over for $200 to suddenly just a few hours later to being able to stay in a mini mansion on Lake Superior for free? You can't pay for it. Doesn't make any sense. Yet that story sounds so familiar, doesn't it? The story of what happened to me and my family is really a lot like the story of what God has done for all of us. You see, we're living our lives in an old spiritual shack that we built with our own hands. And like my friend, Jesus suddenly steps in from out of nowhere and he offers us a better life, a better way to live. He offers us a beautiful home with him. As part of our Seeds series here at Evangel, we've been studying and growing our faith together by digging into a very special book of the Bible. It's the book of Ephesians. It's found in the New Testament portion of the Bible. But it's not just a book. It's so much more than that. It's an actual letter that's being handwritten by a leader in the church, Paul the Apostle. And he was writing to a group of people who loved Jesus. They lived in a city called Ephesus. It was a Roman city in a place that we wouldn't call modern-day Turkey. And he's writing to them as a pastor, as somebody who loves them and cares for them. Now, there's a specific passage, though, in the book of Ephesians, in his letter, that reminds me of my experience last year with the cabin and the lake home. There's a portion of scripture in Ephesians that kind of has an old concept and a new one all rolled up together into one. Paul writes about his desire for Christians to fully and permanently leave their life of darkness and to embrace their new life with Jesus, to step into the light. He starts off in Ephesians 4:17. He says, "With the Lord's authority, I say this." Why would he talk that way? Because he was a respected, honored leader in the church, a great spiritual leader. So he goes on to give them a command. He says, "Live no longer as the Gentiles do, for they are hopelessly confused." I want to remind you again, he's not writing this to just anyone. He's writing this to Christians, people who are supposed to live good lives, and yet he's telling them not to drift back into their old lifestyle and live like those who don't know God. And this makes sense, doesn't it? Makes a lot of sense. I mean, can you imagine if I had decided to still go and get that $200 a night shack, which, by the way, I called the guy up on the phone. I was still within the cancellation period. I was just honest. I told him the story. He's like, "I wouldn't stay in my cabin either. Go stay in that beautiful lake home." He was so kind. But can you imagine if I called him and rented it anyway, and I got the keys to the old shack, and then I got the keys to the lake home, and one day I stayed in one, and the next day in the other, and back and forth, and that'd be dumb, wouldn't it? It would ruin the experience in both places. Guys, I can't physically be in two places at once. We, in the same way, cannot spiritually live in two different worlds at once. Paul was communicating that to these Christians. He loved them, and he was acknowledging what we live today, and that is in a spiritual tug-of-war. The world, our old life, it's pulling at us with our temptations and the darkness and the destructive habits, but yet Jesus is pulling at us too, and he's pulling us to the love of God, to peace and to hope, and to a knowledge of knowing that we're going to heaven. And Paul was acknowledging those different worlds. So he reminds them of where they came from, of their old rundown life. And he describes it by saying, "Live no longer as the Gentiles do." And as if to paint a picture, it's like he grabs a verbal paintbrush and he starts to describe what their old life used to look like. He said their minds are full of darkness. They wander far from the life that God gives because they have closed their minds and they have hardened their hearts against him. They have no sense of shame. They live for lustful pleasure and eagerly practice every kind of impurity. This is shocking language, isn't it? Shocking. Can you imagine if I walked up to you and I said, come here, let me tell you something. You have no sense of shame. I'm telling you, you look like somebody whose mind is filled with darkness. That's strong. But he wasn't trying to beat them up. He loved them. He cared for them. And so he was trying to get a hold of them. He said it that way because something was broken. Something was wrong. And that's why he had to remind Christians to not live that way. He challenged them because some of them had turned back to their old dead way of life. So with this in mind, Paul then begins to give them some of the most incredible seeds. He reaches out and he plants them deep into the soil of the souls of these Christians living in Ephesus, seeds that would bring spiritual maturity. And we see them in his words when he says, but that isn't what you learned about Christ. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. Do you realize what's happening right now? We have an incredible opportunity. There's a letter that's being handwritten by a great spiritual leader, and he's imparting profound truths about what it takes to have spiritual maturity growing up in your life. And we get to lean in and eavesdrop and listen. I think there are some incredibly awesome things that we can learn from Paul as he writes from a pastor's heart to these Christians. And so let's kind of drill down as we think about spiritual maturity and what it takes to grow that in our lives. The first thing that Paul says is, since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him. He was reminding them to know the truth. I know it sounds remedial, elementary, but Paul was saying, guys, you're in the middle of this tug of war. It's pulling you back and forth between an old shack of a spiritual life and a gorgeous, amazing lake home spiritual life. You're being pulled back and forth, but guys, you've left your first love. You've forgotten about the truth. So how do you learn the truth about someone? Well, if somebody came up to me and they told me a lie about you, I could believe it, right? I could go, well, that's the truth. I mean, that's who they are. Or I could text you, we could sit down over coffee, I could hear your life story, and I could get to know you as a person. And then they would come up and they would tell me a lie about you. I go, no, that's not the truth. I know them. I know exactly who they are, and that is not at all the truth. If you want to know the truth about someone, you get to know them. Paul wanted them to focus back on Jesus. Why? Because we can only grow spiritually when we live in the truth. Let's face it, all eternal truth ultimately comes from Jesus. Is there anybody else listening today? It comes from Jesus. That's where truth comes from. And some of the Christians that were no longer living in truth in Ephesus. Worse yet, they were lying to themselves. And this is important, isn't it, for us to hear? Because we so often, we try to mix our old life without Jesus and our new life with Jesus. But we can't. They just don't go together. Have you ever taken a glass of water, poured some oil in it, and tried to mix it feverishly together? And what happens? The oil just comes right back to the top. It will not mix with the water. Guys, in the same way, our old lives and our new lives, they don't mix together. Look, let me give you an example. I could buy a $10,000 mattress, right? I could drag it into that old shack of a cabin, and I could put it right there in the kitchen next to the kitchen table, and I could get the most amazing night's sleep. But it wouldn't matter how much I spend on that mattress. It wouldn't matter how good of a night's sleep I get. I would still wake up in an old shack of a cabin. In the same way, guys, we can take our most priceless possession while we are here on this earth, the most priceless thing we have, our relationship with Jesus, and we can drag him in to a spiritual shack of a life. But at the end of the day, we're still going to be in darkness. At the end of the day, we're still going to be hopeless. We need the truth. So many of us, we fall into the trap, hanging on to old destructive ways of living, somehow hoping that if we mix it together with Jesus, that it'll work, but it won't. And I've been there, man. I've made a ton of excuses. I've given into temptation. I've messed up. And I realize when I come back to Jesus, there's no mixing the old and the new. So Paul says, the way you're living is not the truth that comes from him. Hanging on to your old life and still trying to live a new life as a Christian is like kitchen tables and mattresses side by side. They just don't go together. But there's a deeper problem, isn't there? You see, making up a convenient spiritual lifestyle is so much easier than living out the truth. Here's why. When we live by the truth, we have to tell ourselves no. And that takes discipline. In fact, most of us in the weakest areas of our lives, we don't like to tell ourselves no. We run from discipline. But there's an even more potent thing about truth, and that's this. Truth offends, doesn't it? It's offensive. You see, truth tells me things that I don't want to know about myself, things that I want to deny and pretend that aren't there. And that's why we need Jesus. Paul is like, come on, Christians in Ephesus. Let me tell you where you need to go. You need to go back to the starting place. You need to focus on Jesus. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. How many of you believe that Jesus is the place we need to go back to every single day? And it's true. If you want spiritual maturity, you have to know Jesus and you have to pursue him. The truth that we find in Jesus is so important because truth always has the power, if we let it, to bring life. If we don't know the truth, we won't know how we need to change. But when we open our hearts to change, then the life that can only come from God will spring forth. To the Jews who believed in him, Jesus said in John 8, he said, if you hold to my teaching, if you grab a hold of it, if you cling to it with everything within you, Jesus said, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth. You'll know right from wrong, and the truth will set you free. Isn't that awesome? Jesus acknowledged the power of truth, that it breaks bondages, it breaks chains in a way that almost nothing else can. He is the way, the truth, and the life. You guys want to know the truth? You want to know the truth about me? I got a problem. See, I love food. I love food. Man, I get passionate about food. But there's one type of food I could eat every single day. You see, I love ice cream. Oh my gosh. Love ice cream. And there's a way that I eat ice cream that is very specific. It's my favorite way to eat it. You see, I get a bowl and I get a box of Lucky Charms. You know the cereal with the little candied marshmallows in there? Amazing. I pour it into a bowl. I get a heap of the best, amazing vanilla ice cream. I put it in the bowl with the Lucky Charms. I stir it all together. Guys, it's so good. So delicious. Man, it'll blow your mind. It'll blow the taste buds right off your tongue. I want to warn you, don't try it. Don't try it. It's like food crack. I'm telling you, you'll eat it every single night like me. Don't do it. Don't do it. But honestly, guys, I love food. I love food, but here's the problem. My problem, food loves me. It does. You see, when I eat food, it doesn't want to leave me, and my body makes room for food. I get bigger and bigger. And here's how I know. Because the first 10 years of my life that my wife and I were married, I was 45 pounds heavier than I am right now, and so was my wife. Guys, I ate all the food I could get my hands on. I ate it whenever I wanted it, and a heaping bowl of ice cream and Lucky Charms almost every night. It was so awesome. I ate food and ate food. But then, after about 10 years, my wife one day looked in the mirror, and she saw the truth. She heard the truth. And she didn't like what she saw, and she didn't like the way that it made her feel. And so she made a change. She decided to lower the amount of food she was eating, her intake every day, and anything that went into her mouth went on a piece of paper, no cheating. She wrote it down, and after 2 weeks, she had lost about 8 to 10 pounds. I was like, wow, This is working. It was noticeable. She had momentum, and I didn't want to get left behind. So I did the same thing, man. I lowered what I was eating, and I wrote everything down that went into my mouth. And guys, it was hard. It was hard. We worked out 5-6 days a week. We ate very little. I was hungry, so hungry. But after 9 months, the weight came off. We have kept it off for over 15 years. Guys, no, hold your applause. I don't tell you that to pat me on the back or to say, hey, look at me. Guys, I'm trying to be vulnerable here. I love food, but it wasn't until my wife saw the truth, heard the truth, and it was the truth that gave us the power, the acceptance, the embrace of that truth, that gave us the power with God's help to lose that weight. Paul says, that is not the way of life that you have learned. Here's what you have learned. Throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Paul is really trying to uncover something. He's really trying to make the point, once you know the truth, God is going to reveal something in your life that you need to let go. Why let go? Because freedom comes when we let go of spiritually dangerous things that are holding on to us or that we are holding on to. The connotation here, or the context, when you look it up in the Greek, this idea of throwing off, when you look that up, the real background for that is like clothes, dirty clothes that are sweaty and covered with dirt. You've been out in the lawn working all day, and all of a sudden you go to get in the shower and you take your clothes and you throw them off. But how many of you know that when I do that, when you do that, my clothes never hit the floor when I throw them. I can throw them over and over again. But it isn't until I let go that then my clothes, I get rid of those dirty things. And I'll put them back on when I'm clean. It's so important to be able to let go. When we let go of something old, we need to remember, and Paul is saying this, God will always give us something new. And I get it. It's a process. That letting go doesn't happen overnight. It's hard. Here's why. When I was walking around that mini mansion on Lake Superior with all those gorgeous views, for almost 3 days at least, I didn't feel like I belonged there. I didn't feel like I should be there. I'm like, whose house is this and why am I here? Even though my friend had given me the key, he had given me permission to be there. I essentially almost owned it for 7 days, but I still felt like I didn't belong. Why? Because I'm a kid from Minnesota. I grew up in the land of 10,000 lakes, and I had gone to so many old shacks of cabins that were ready to fall over. And that was the mentality I had. I had an old shack cabin mentality. It's hard to let go of something when you've been holding on to it for so long. Every one of us, we have something that we've been holding on to. Some of us have been hanging on to something, believing that it can't be replaced with something new from God. If that's you, you're wrong. It can. By keeping old spiritual junk in our minds and our hearts, you know what we're doing? We're actually stunting the spiritual growth, the spiritual maturity that God wants to bring to our lives. Let me give you a couple examples. Some of you are hanging on to greed, either because of your need or because of your excess. And it's time to let go. It's time to be painfully generous. Some of you, maybe you're hanging on to a damaging relationship, something that's damaging your spiritual life with Jesus. It's time to let go of your connection with that person who is pulling you away from God. Some of you, you've been hanging on to anger. Well, it's time to let go of your anger by showing kindness to that person who has hurt you, believing and trusting and knowing that God will take care of them. I think you get the idea. When we let go of anger, we gain peace. When we let go of greed, we gain contentment. When we let go of destructive relationships, guys, we gain freedom and a deeper relationship with Jesus. Guess what I'm trying to say is, whatever you do, don't get stuck in the monkey trap. Maybe you've heard that before. Don't get stuck in the monkey trap. Well, we think of monkeys and we're like, oh, they're so cute, they're pretty, they're in our zoos. But what we forget, there are millions of monkeys all over the world. And to many farmers, monkeys are destructive. They come and they eat their crops or they kill their animals. And millions of monkeys throughout the world. And there are many ways to catch monkeys. But one way that some farmers or hunters will use is they'll grab a container or a coconut, something that's really heavy or a coconut that they can chain to a tree, and they put a hole in the top of the container, the heavy container, or in the top of the coconut where the monkey with an open palm can slide their hand in. But then what they do is they put something that the monkey really wants. They put nuts in there. The monkeys can smell these nuts, and so the hunters will put them down in the jungle or chain them to trees, and they'll go and they'll hide. And the monkey comes along. He smells it. He knows it's there. He walks up to the container, and he slides his open hand in, and he goes to grab the nuts. Did you notice my nuts here are marshmallows? Did you guys see that? I mean, it's appropriate, right? So he goes to put his hand in there, and now, guys, everything has changed. He can feel it. He can taste it. He's salivating. He can see it in his mind. He can smell it. But now he's got his fist clenched around it, and he can't pull his hand out. It's stuck. But guys, he's not captured. He's still free. But he's stuck. He can't get away. And it's all because of an idea of something that's pleasurable, something that he wants. And all he has to do to get free is to let go. To let go. But he doesn't. And so the hunter jumps out from behind a tree, comes and grabs a monkey easily and throws him into a bag. This is so much like us, isn't it? If you let go of what you're holding on to, I promise you, you will be free. You'll be free. And the best part of when we let go of something old, not only does God give us something new, but He also puts us in a position to bless others. Again, Paul in Ephesians, he's comparing, the old spiritual shack of a life to a new spiritual lake home. He's saying, guys, come here. I want to help you. Know the truth. Know Jesus. But be careful. Don't get stuck in the monkey trap. Let go. Free yourself. But then he goes on. And he says this, he says, instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. A change is coming. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. It's the idea of doing good. Do good, he says. You know the truth. You let go. Now do good. Guys, what is God like? You have been created to be like God when we know that God is good. I don't know if you've thought about the goodness of God lately, but I wake up in the morning, I get my coffee, I go into my room, and I shut the door, and the goodness of God begins to flood my soul. Guys, I come to this place, and I talk to you, and the goodness of God comes from you to me. I don't know if you guys realize this or not, but you've been miraculously made new if you are a follower of Jesus. You've been created to be like God. Did you know that you are God's representative? When people see you, they see Him. And they see somebody who is righteous, pure, and holy, not because of your own hard work, but because of the blood of Jesus. This is the point where everything starts to change. Paul is planting spiritual seeds of maturity, and then he gets to the pinnacle of maturity when he points out this idea of doing good when we serve and we help others. Not just a one-time event, but when we make serving our lifestyle. I'm convinced that every person has been put here on this earth not to be a consumer, but to be a connector. A connector, someone who is constantly looking for ways to serve other people so that the people they're serving, they can connect them to Jesus. That's why we exist as Evangel. That's why we're here right now. We exist to connect real people to a real God. So I ask you, are you a consumer or are you a connector? Are you a consumer? Do you wake up every day and say, how can I have more fun? How can I make my life more comfortable? How can I get more pleasure? Or do you wake up every day as a connector and you say, how can I serve other people so that I can connect those that I'm serving to Jesus? I'm His representative. I've been put here to do good. We know that that's what Paul's getting at because he goes on to say, if you're a thief, quit stealing. Instead, use your hands for good hard work and then give generously to others in need. Don't use foul or abusive language. He says, let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. Paul is like, man, some of you guys, you used to steal. You used your hands to steal and take things. I want you now to use those hands to work hard. And the hands that used to steal, now I want you to give generously. It's like some of you, you've got a mouth problem. You criticize, you gossip, you rip other people down behind their backs. Now I want you to use that same mouth. Now that Jesus you've met him and you've been set free from that trap, I want you to go up to people, the same people that you would tear down with your mouth. Now I want you to encourage them, build them up. It's exactly what Jesus was trying to highlight when he said in Matthew 5:16, this lifestyle. He said, in the same way, let your light shine. Did you guys know you have God's light inside of you? It didn't originate with you, but God has put it on deposit in your soul for other people to see. There is power inside of you. But Jesus didn't stop there. He said, let it shine before others that they may see your good deeds. Don't underestimate the power of being a connector, of serving others. Why? Because Jesus says, do your good deeds and they will glorify your Father in heaven. Man, a switch is going to flip in their life. A miracle is going to take place. You guys ready to see those kind of miracles? I know I am. I want it to happen all around me. I want to serve Jesus. Here's the key. No matter how big the good is that you do, no matter how little the good is that you do, don't ever forget that it can have a huge impact in people's lives. The story is told of a woman who worked at a meat packing plant. She had worked there for years, but one day it was quitting time and everybody was getting ready to leave, and she knew she had to do something in the freezer, and so she walked into the freezer before she was going to leave work. She walked in and suddenly she inadvertently locked herself in the freezer. She immediately freaked out. She panicked. She ran to the freezer door. She began to bang. She knew that all of her coworkers were on the other side of the wall, but it was so insulated, so thermal designed that no one could hear her. She began to cry. She was panicking. She was screaming, freaking out. Finally, after a couple hours, she slumped to the ground and she just began to sob. She was getting colder and colder. She was losing hope till she was almost ready to succumb to hypothermia. She was almost ready to die. And then the door to the freezer, it flew open. And a man walked in. It was the security guard. And he grabbed her right at the point of death. And he pulled her out of the freezer. And he saved her life. Guys, as she was recovering, as she was getting better, she wanted to go thank the security guard. She just had to thank him for finding her, but also wanted to ask him how he found her and why he went looking for her. So one day she went to him. It was just a little while afterwards, and she went to him and she said, how did you find me? Thank you. Why did you look for me? And he said, I've worked here for 35 years. And he said, as you know, you've been here for a long time. You know, hundreds of employees come in the morning, hundreds of employees leave in the afternoon, evening. And he said, but I'm invisible to almost all of them, except for you. Except for you. Every morning you walk in, you look me in the eyes, you smile, you say, good morning, how are you doing? And he said, at the end of the day, when you leave, people pass me by, but you don't. You tap me on the shoulder and you say, hey, have a good night. I'll see you tomorrow. And he said, that day that you were in the freezer, that you were about to die, he said, I had heard you say good morning, but I never heard you say good night. And I missed it. And I knew something was wrong. Something wrong must have happened. And he said, I got up and I began to search all over the place. I even went to places I would never normally go. I walked into the freezer and I found you. He said, because every time I see you, you remind me that I have value, that I mean something to someone. Guys, no matter how big the good you do, no matter how small, just remember, it can have an absolutely huge impact on the people around you. So as we close, I ask you, how are you going to live? From this day forward, as you've heard the words, as we've eavesdropped and listened to Paul the Apostle, he said, know the truth, know Jesus. And then he said, look, don't get caught in the monkey trap, let go, do good. So you have a choice. How are you going to live? Men, women, you see, you have the keys. They're within your reach to do two different spiritual worlds, two different spiritual homes. You have the key to a world, a spiritual home, a spiritual shack of a cabin that you build that's based on pleasure seeking, that's based on destructive habits and on selfishness, a one filled with hopelessness and darkness. But I want to give you some good news. And you have access, it's within your reach, to a spiritual home with Jesus. It's one filled with hope, with peace, and the love of God. There are no regrets in this home. No regrets. Come on. Today you'll walk out, and you're going to grab a key, and you're going to choose the way you live. My prayer is that you throw the spiritual shack away. Come on, take this key, take it, and run with it. Paul says, turn your back on your former life. Embrace Jesus. Let go. And do good. So as we close, there are some of you in this room, you want to know Jesus, but you've never made the decision to know him. You're like, Travis, I know what you're telling me is true. It's real. I want to give my life to Jesus. I want you to bow your heads and close your eyes. If you're here and you're listening to my voice somewhere in this place or somewhere else, and you're saying, you know what, I don't know Jesus, but I want to know him. Let me tell you something, that's an awesome feeling. That's an incredible thing. Right now in this moment, if you want to make that decision, if you want to grab that key to the spiritual lake home, and you just want to raise your hand and say, Jesus, I want to know you. I give you my life. I just ask you right now with your heads bowed, eyes closed, raise your hand right now. Just say, Jesus. Raise your hand. Hands are going up across this auditorium. Raise your hand. Thank you. You can put them down. Raise your hand. Jesus, I give you my life. I take the key to that spiritual lake home in the balcony. Raise your hand. You can put them down. Let's pray. Pray this prayer with me if you raised your hand. Pray it in your heart. Jesus, be my Lord. I give control of my life to you. Jesus, take me. Remove everything that is sinful. I love you, Jesus. Be my Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, man, I am so proud of you. I made that decision at one point in my life, and it's one decision I'll never regret. Would you give it up for those that raised their hands? That's awesome. So cool. So cool. Would you stand? Guys, Paul talked about knowing Jesus, knowing the truth, but he also talked about letting go. There are some of you in this room. We have prayer teams that are coming in a moment. Come and get prayer. You need to get prayer. Why? Because in James it says, pray for one another, confess your faults one to another, and pray for each other that you might be healed. God has a miracle. If you just let go once and for all. People are going to come around you and they're going to pray for you in a moment, and God's going to do some incredible things. Would you give it up for Jesus this morning one more time?
We're so glad you joined us today. Our hope is that you're challenged and encouraged by these teachings every week. We'd love to hear how God is using this ministry to change lives. Send us an email at mystory@goevangel.org. For more information about our church, check us out online at goevangel.org.